Again, as was the case last week, I am um, broadcasting to you live from Cape Town, Azania. Azania is a Zulu word that the people indigenous to this region call this country that you would call South Africa by its colonial name. Its actual name is Azania. That's what the people here call it. That's what we call it. Land of the Black people. So we're glad that you're here with us for this week's episode. We have some very important programming coming up for you all on this weekly channel. Today's program is obviously an essential one, but next week, Shakura is going to be sharing her report back on her trip to socialist Cuba last week. And then the following week, I'll be using this program to report back on this trip to Azania. This is, I was telling Shakura, I've been all over Africa. I love everywhere I've been. Everywhere I go, people welcome us. But this has been a unique experience being here, and primarily because the experiences of Africans in the U.S. and Africans in this country, known as South Africa, are very similar in terms of each of us living in settler colonies, each of us living under the domination of European capitalists, each of us living in these industrialized societies. So I have a lot of interesting things to share in 2 weeks, and Shakura has a lot of interesting things to share next week. So you will not want to miss those. Put them on your calendar. We want to give honor and respect to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And I've had a number of conversations with people here, some of them comrades in the APRP that, are here, but even just everyday people on the street, because I'm talking to a lot of people on the street every day. And we're downtown, we're staying downtown, so we run into people constantly and in Africa, you have constant conversations with people. It's not like the U.S. It's how backward it is in the U.S., where you see people every day for years and you never have a conversation with them. Here, you have conversations with people immediately, and people here understand clearly that the Americas belong to the indigenous people. They ask the question, why are they calling the people who are native there illegal aliens? And it makes sense if you know the history of this country. And if you don't, you'll learn it in 2 weeks if you tune in. It makes sense that they would understand that because they are here indigenous to this land, and the Europeans came and took it over. And so from that standpoint, they understand the people having their land taken over and the people still being there and claiming that the people who are actually indigenous to the land are the foreigners, as is the case for our people here, as is the case for the indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere. So, people here understand the contradiction of land, illegal aliens, and all that nonsense. So it's interesting to talk. They have a better understanding of it than people who live in the U.S. And so that just really reinforces, even though there are no indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere here, there's more respect for their struggle here. If you can swallow that, there's more respect for their struggle, even among the so-called elements within the U.S. that are supposed to be conscious. There's more consciousness about the Americas belonging to the indigenous people here than there is even among those elements in the U.S. So we say that to honor the indigenous struggle, and then of course we also honor our African ancestors who this is every time I come home it's a spiritual journey. So really just taking that in. And of course, yesterday was January 17th, which means we have to acknowledge the 1961, January 17th, 1961 assassination of Patrice Emery Lumumba, the first prime minister of an independent Congo on January 17th, 1961. Imperialism led by the Central Intelligence Agency assassinated Patrice Lumumba. So we honor him, and he lives within our hearts and minds every day. as are John Huggins and Apprentice Bunchy Carter, leaders of the LA branch of the Black Panther Party in the US, who were killed on January 17th, 1969, same day, 8 years after Patrice Lumumba was assassinated. Those two leaders were assassinated on the University of California, Los Angeles campus in an FBI instigated feud between elements within the African community. And with everything happening in the world today, I mean, I see so much. And, there's so much happening. It's so important to keep your focus, keep your mind, your eyes on the prize. And so I really appreciate and respect those of you who are choosing to pay attention to this platform because we have one objective here. We ask very little of anyone, but we have one objective that we're achieving here, and that is to provide political education. There is a lot of work that goes into these programs every week, a lot of work that goes into making sure that what we talk about is accurate and that we know what we're talking about and that we can cite for you where we get the information we share with you each week. And our sole purpose for doing that is to hopefully inspire you to want to get engaged. We make a call to action for you to get engaged to build the society that you want. And so that's our only objective. There's so many grifters on social media, so many people who take a position based on their desire to build a brand and profit. And that's not what we're doing here. We're trying to give people inspiration to organize for a better world. So we hope that that is clear to you. And I'll even go a step farther and say if it's not, it's because you're not paying attention. But I think most of you are. That's why you're here. So glad to be here with you. It's 2:08 in the morning here. Azania, South Africa is 10 hours ahead of Pacific time, which is what I live under in California in the US. So, it's a sacrifice to be up, tired, but inspired to do this work. So glad that you're here, and we'll just get started by doing our usual introductions. Our Ancestors' Voices is a program sponsored every Sunday by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP. And the APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party with a base in Africa. And our objective is Pan-Africanism, defined correctly as one unified socialist Africa. And I'll talk about this when I do my report back, but I had the opportunity to see the prison housing where Robert Sobukwe spent his last days. And if you don't know, he is the founder of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, the organization that spurred the Sharpeville uprising in 1960 against the pass laws here in Azania, South Africa. Pan-Africanist Sobukwe was, and of course, one of the people I've looked to since I was a teenager, and just really, wanting to make sure that we are doing everything we can to uphold the legacy and the dignity that Sobukwe gave us. He was isolated at Robben Island Prison. He was not permitted to speak to anybody, and nobody was permitted to speak to him. He was placed alone for years. They did that to him. Most people know Nelson Mandela. He was at Robben Island Prison. He was never isolated. He was with the other population because Sobukwe was deemed a much larger threat, correctly, because of his Pan-African outlook and work. And I apologize for the background noise. I'm sitting here in the lobby where we're staying, and there are people coming in who have enjoyed the nightlife in Cape Town, Azania, South Africa. So I'll do my best to work through that. Our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's handbook of revolutionary warfare, which is displayed on this page. And our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by myself, Ajamu, and my daughter, Dr. Shakura Umi, who is my biological and ideological daughter. And They're both active organizers within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So, with that, I will turn it over to Shukura.
Thank you, Baba Jamu. I appreciate you. Greetings, everyone. What's going on? Good to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you continue to feel fired up and ready to go because, as Baba Jamu said, we are on the move, you all. Now is the time for action. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. With that, we will go ahead and jump into our presentation. This is literally such a great way to start the year. And I really love that we have this seminar in the rotation because it's always important, especially this month in January, but even next month in February, where it's easy to be swayed by the propaganda, right? So the propaganda teaches us, especially in the month of February, A, that it only centers the contributions of Africans who were born in the US, which is problematic because clearly we need to know more than just those who were born here on indigenous soil. But we also need to be mindful of our comrades who were born outside within the diaspora and how their work, even though we may not know about it, also greatly contributed to a lot of the conditions and the sacrifices and the stances that we find ourselves in today. For example, it's really important for us to know about Garrett Morgan, Martin Luther King, of course, Harriet Tubman, of course, but it's also important for us to know about Carlotta, who led the slave revolt in Matanzas, Cuba. It's also important for us to know about any of the Africans on the continent who fought and resisted colonialism, like our comrade who is still living in Guinea-Bissau, our comrade Mama Theodore Gomes. So my point is, this is really important for us to talk about Dr. King today, but let us not get confused that we should also be learning about his work outside of the US context. That's what I'm trying to say to us today. And I know Baba Ajamu will talk about that more throughout the presentation, but I really would stress that you all take it upon yourselves to do some investigative research. We always say that your political education is literally the key to unlocking the lies that have been withheld. And I would argue, had Dr. King been able to live a little bit longer, especially because he was just starting to develop his Pan Africanist drive, he would have been unstoppable. And he also would have impacted so many more people to understand there really is a connection to Africa's oppression and the oppressed experiences of all Africans everywhere, whether it's the diaspora, whether it's the continent, whatever, right? So this is really important as we start to think about this. And that's the frame that we want to think of Dr. King in. Instead, if we're not interested in investigating this information, if we're not interested in thinking for ourselves, if we're not interested in taking things upon ourselves to create our own narrative, then we are subdued to follow and to listen to what the oppressor and the master has given us. And this is what the master and the oppressor have given us: the king that they want us to know, the king that they want us to learn about, the king that they want us to believe was the only part of what made him who he was, that he didn't have any evolution, that he didn't have any progression, and that even going home to the continent didn't change him at all. That's where you're confused. And this is why you can't expect the master to give you tools that will free you, because that's not their job to do that. That's your job to think outside the box and to think beyond that. So we can start with thinking about how every January 15th, there is a commemoration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his birthday, especially as it relates to the same annual speech and the snippet. We've all heard it, right? That snippet that comes from his very famous MLK speech, the one and only, the quote, "I have a dream" speech, right? End quote, which is a wonderful speech. It's wonderful. It's fantastic. It has truly transcended across decades, where all of us can remember that famous line, right? All of us can remember that he had a dream that one day, children of all different races could play together. It's a great speech. It's wonderful. But here's the thing: it is not easily outperformed, okay? It was easily outperformed, excuse me, by many of his other very incredible and substantial contributions and speeches. But those don't get played as much. Those don't get as much airtime. Those you can't find as easily, right? This is why you got to do some investigative research. That's why I said that, because you're going to have to dig deep. You're going to have to go into some resources that maybe you haven't tapped into before. You're going to have to type into some different websites that may not be legal, if you understand what I'm saying, so that you can try to find what you need to find. You need to understand that these speeches were withheld for a reason. All the more reason why we should find them and listen to them. Okay. All the more reason. The capitalist system is not concerned at all with the substance, not concerned at all. Couldn't care less. Okay. Only with the propaganda, because the propaganda sells the idea that they want to maintain. So they're only concerned with the propaganda because it upholds their interests. It upholds their material interests, their economic interests, their social, emotional interests, all of that. It upholds all of that for them because the system was created and designed for them, not for oppressed people, not for colonized people, not for differently abled, queer people, non male. We could go on and on, right? So the single speech is a good speech. It is, but it's not within its challenges, right? The status of the queue, right? And that's why there is a go to every year because it only perpetuates the safety part of not pushing and rocking the boat. It perpetuates that, yes, we should end racism, but it doesn't perpetuate we should resist and rise up and organize against it. And that's a safe speech because then the system can uphold itself. It doesn't have to worry about us becoming too radical, us becoming too revolutionary, or us becoming too socialist, right? We don't have to worry about that. It's safe and it's safer to us for us to just maintain and stay in our lanes. And more importantly, the speech perpetuates accumulation and acculturation and assimilation. It perpetuates all of that. It does not perpetuate, as I said, that you should actually rise up and take a different approach, maybe even a more violent one, because that would be contradictory to what they're also teaching us about him, is that he was a nonviolent person. And we know now, after several years of doing research, but also after several years of us doing a seminar on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we know that one of his practices was nonviolence, but that was not his whole entire behavior. And he literally started to shift that the closer he got to going home to the continent, especially after his trip when he went home to Africa. So I think that, him being able to go to Ghana and coming back and understanding, some different things, Baba Ajama will talk about his work with the Deacons for Defense. Like all of that was because he understood his life was on the line. You can't continue to be nonviolent when people are literally trying to kill you. That's not going to make any sense. At some point, you're going to have to fight fire with fire. And King understood that. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't understand that? This man had his house bombed. His parents were brutally murdered. Like we can't. Come on, you all. Come on. We gotta do better. We gotta do better. And King understood that. He understood that. He understood that. He understood that. So even when we look at this speech, the March on Washington, on August 28th in 1963. It was scripted as an event where the agenda was directed by the Kennedy administration, and King's speech, the quote unquote I Have a Dream speech, was a moderate that day. Even by today's standards, it was considered moderate. So, as we think about this more, I want us to think again about the frame of who King actually was and how this is important for us to do our own research and to learning that. Next slide, please. But also, we need to be thinking about how King is projected to be to us. And this is why it's important for us to have our own abilities to think for ourselves, because the system is only going to give you the information that they want that maintains their agenda. So we have to realize that we can't trust it. We have to. It's the only way, especially when it comes to learning about somebody who was really being shifted and really starting to consider what it meant to rock the boat more. That's definitely not what they're going to encourage you to do, is to research that, because then you're going to start to be informed by that. You're going to start to be influenced by it. You're going to start to want to rock the boat yourself. And then you would be considered a problematic person. And that then the FBI will have to keep an eye on you and all that other nonsense, right? So like this is how it's all broken down. And I think if we just talk about it, then we can understand it, right? So we can start to, unlift the veil of ignorance, to quote Booker T. We can start to unlift that by looking at some of the origins of how truth was justified, right? So we can start with understanding that Miss Rosa Parks was not someone who just decided one day to get up, okay? She was a member of the Montgomery, Alabama U.S. National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And we always say the importance of joining an organization that is working for justice, you all. So even Rosa Parks was a member of the NAACP, the Montgomery chapter. Even Rosa Parks was a member, okay? She wasn't even the first person to refuse to give up her seat. She wasn't even the first person.
I'm not sure what happened to Shakura. I know she was
Action
having some.
lawsuit was
Okay.
filed. Oh, am I back? Sorry. Thank you. Okay, I'll just repeat that just to make sure you all heard that. So Rosa Parks gets all the credit, but she wasn't even the first person to refuse to give up her seat. At 15 years of age, thank you, comrades on Zoom. I appreciate you confirming I'm back. At only 15 years of age, Claudette Colvin of Montgomery refused to give up her seat on the bus to a European woman in March of 1955. A class action lawsuit was filed against the city of Montgomery with Miss Colvin and three other African women. But because Miss Colvin was with child, the accommodationist ministers who led the NAACP did not want her to become the face of the bus boycott. Dr. King attended the first meeting for the Montgomery Association, and he left that meeting as the president of the association. And as I remember Baba Ajamu telling the story, King showed up at the meeting and sat in the back and was just trying to eat his sandwich. He hadn't had a meal that day and he was just trying to eat his dinner. And they called on him and appointed him to be the president of the association. And that wasn't even his objective when he showed up to that meeting that night, right? So, this is why it's important to understand how all of this breaks down. We can see the photo on the slide. Dr. King leading a meeting for the Montgomery Association after being elected president, right? And how all of this is connected because we understand that, with Claudette Colvin being the first one to refuse her seat, but not the organization not wanting her to be the face because she was with child, like a lot of the contradictions within that, we could talk about that all day. But at the end of the day, they needed to have a certain face that represented this, right? And so Rosa Parks was able to fit that profile a little bit better. But this is how we can start to think about this because of Claudette, because of Rosa Parks, and so many others who we don't even know their names, but they refused. There was this ongoing initiative where we were starting to stand up for ourselves, not starting, but we were publicly standing up where it was becoming more brutal and more risky, but that still motivated us to keep going. And then, of course, that led into the meeting being held that night, and then King walking away being the president of this NAACP Montgomery chapter. So as I prepare to turn the slide direction back over to Baba Ajamu, I just want to say that looking at this other picture on the slide, we have Miss Colvin at 15 years of age. So, like, this is why it's important, you all, when you are talking about different Africans who have contributed to our struggle, whether they were born outside in the diaspora or within the U.S., try to challenge yourself to learn some new names. And we always say that. We always challenge you to say, can you name 5 African non-male people who were born in the diaspora? Can you name 5 African non-binary people who were born in the diaspora, right? Can you name 5 African male people born in the diaspora, right? We challenge you to do that because every year it's going to get harder and harder for us to think for ourselves. And this is why we have to take that stand. But also, this is why we need to keep our brain developing because it's a muscle. And part of that is enhancing it and getting access to more education. I'll also say that even with me not being in Memphis anymore, I can still feel the spirit of our broadcast that we did at the Lorraine Motel that year. And I can still think about how exciting it was to be there, to be on that ancestral ground. Even with King being assassinated there, I felt so much reassurance that the work that we were doing was so important. And even now, when I look at sanitation workers and I think about how far we've come, but also how much farther we have to go, even thinking about the treatment of sanitation workers in Havana, Cuba, compared to the treatment of them here and how they're constantly going on strike because they're not valued and they're not respected. And that is the reason that King went to Memphis, because he wanted to support them with that. Like, this is, doing the poor people's campaign work. Like, this is how all of this is connected, you all. And all of it is based off of capitalism, is based off of economics, but it's also based off of humanity and treatment and understanding at the end of the day, there's got to be a better system. Capitalism is not the answer. So, however you choose to go about understanding that, whatever research that you want to do to get on that journey of doing that, we appreciate you being here with us today. But we hope that your research, it doesn't stop with this seminar, because we clearly have so much information that we still need to get access to. And it's going to take all of us to be as best informed as we can be, even if we're in organizations that are working for justice, and even if we're not, we still need to be informed so that we can continue to move forward with that, because this is the only way. We are the ones that we've been waiting for, and we owe it to Dr. King and so many more of our ancestors to do better, because they're counting on us. We cannot sit idle, and we cannot sit by and do nothing. Bystanders is not acceptable, and it will not be tolerated. Ashe.
Ashe. And, every week when Shakura transitions to me, I always say thank you in several of the African languages in various parts of Africa where I've been privileged to go and do work. And so I say Madasi, which is thank you very much in Tree language, which I speak um, a significant portion of that language spoken in the Ghana area of West Africa, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire. I also say Asante Sana, which is thank you very much in Swahili, which is spoken widely throughout Eastern Africa. I say obrigada, which is actually Portuguese, thank you very much, which is spoken in Guinea-Bissau, which I learned when I was there with the comrades. And down here in Azania, South Africa, Zulu, thank you is in Kosi. So I'll add that to the list. So Madasi, Asante Sana, Obrigada, in Kosi. Thank you, Shakura. And, before I get started with my part, I just want to add that, we've been doing this program for 5 years, going on 6 years. March of this year will be 6 years. Every Sunday we've done this program. We've only missed, I believe, 2 times in 6 years, hundreds of programs. And when we started doing this, we started it during the pandemic, and we wanted to be as productive as we could, sitting in our houses, and we just continued it. And I never imagined we would be doing this 6 years later. But with everything going on in the world, what happened in Venezuela, the threats against Cuba, what's happening in Haiti, what the U.S. bombing Nigeria and Somalia, the ICE raids throughout the United Snakes of America. Political education is more important now than ever. And I just see the importance of this program more now than I ever have. We are at such a lack of political education. I'm sitting here in Africa right now, and every time I come to Africa, this happens. My wife and I joke about it all the time. We see people every day that remind us of people we know in the States, and Saturday, we were at the marketplace, and my wife came running over there, and I said, I just saw my dad. My father has been deceased for 26 years, but I saw this dude looked just like my daddy. I'm saying, and I told him, I said, dude, I'm not trying to stare at you, but you look just like my father. And he said, well, is he here? Has he? I said, no, he's been dead since 1999. He never had the privilege of coming home to Africa. He was from Louisiana in the United States, but you probably look like you were related. Like we might be related. You look just like him, I'm telling you. And he looked like me as a result. We looked the same. And he said, yeah, I see that. So I mean, there's so many people like that. We see celebrities, people, and it's so it makes it so strange that our people in the US say, well, I'm not African. And every time I hear someone say that, I know that they not only have they never been to Africa, but they don't know anything about Africa. because if they did, they couldn't bring their lips to even say something like that. It's so obvious when you're here. But if all your training and understanding is based on you being in the US, you are not going to know anything about yourself. The US is organized so that you know nothing about yourself. Absolutely nothing. And if you don't have a process in place to educate yourself and your children and your family, then they're not going to know anything. And that's a lot of the reason why we are so confused in our existence there. And every time I come here, it does two things. Number one, it reinforces for me, exactly who we are. And then it also makes me really want to accelerate my process of getting out of the United States of America. I mean, my wife and I talk about it all the time, and I'm trying to go slow. I still have another year to work, and that'll be it. I'm not one of those people that's going to be talking about retirement forever. I can guarantee you that. I am going to be retiring, and I want to go slow because this is only her second time to Africa, so I'm trying to get her to warm up to it and understand it and want to do it. And we'll continue to work on that. But I just think that that there's just nothing. There's not. They have this big illusion of you being there. And it's like Dr. Martin Luther King said, I'm afraid that I've integrated my people into a burning building. And that's exactly right. So, let's talk about Dr. King's political evolution. In 1960, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference board member Ella Baker, because again, women are always written out of history. So Ella Baker organized a conference at Shaw University, the historically African university in Raleigh, North Carolina. And the purpose of that conference was to bring all of the youth together and to make a call for a new organization separate from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC. And Miss Baker's vision for doing that is that she didn't want youth to be smothered by the accommodationist conservative views of the older ministers. And that was a revolutionary move that Miss Ella Baker made, because that conference at Shaw University spawned the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which I have consistently argued is, in my humble opinion, one of, if not the most important organizations within the United States in the entire 20th century, right? And so that's what happened. And the civil rights work in the early 60s was dangerous that SNCC was involved in, the freedom rides, the sit-ins. It was very dangerous work. And because of that, most people didn't participate long in that work. And so, most people don't know much about the struggle. We just know talking points. Most people have not studied. I'm talking about our people. We haven't studied, and we haven't studied it. Of course, nobody else has either. So we don't really understand that there were very few people in terms of numbers who were actually involved in the civil rights movement. It wasn't, if you listen to people talk now, they talk like millions of people were involved in the civil rights movement. That was not true. It was a very small number of people. And the organizations that were central to that work were the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, and then to, I would argue, a lesser extent, the National Urban League and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. And those organizations, there were so few people, they had to form what was called the Council of Federated Organizations, COFO, which you see a picture on the screen is in front of the office, which is now kind of like a historical monument of COFO. And what COFO was a working coalition that permitted persons from all three groups to engage in direct actions for the civil rights movement. That's why the three civil rights workers who were killed in Mississippi in 1964, the two Europeans, Michael Swarner and Andrew Goodman, were members of CORE. And the African, James Chaney, was a member of SNCC. They were working together because that's what they always had to do, because there were not enough of them. So the real story is that by 1964, serious disagreements began to develop within the civil rights movement. And when you included the NAACP, which was a major fundraiser for the on-the-ground civil rights work, those disagreements over ideology and practice were much deeper because the NAACP was financed primarily by Europeans. So consequently, their political position was always very conservative. They were never in favor of any radical. Roy Wilkins, who was the president of the NAACP at that time, was never always the first voice. And Whitney Young, who was the director of the Urban League, they were the first voices to denounce any suggestion of militant struggle of any kind, right? So that there were a lot of disagreements. And the core of the disagreement was this concept of nonviolence being a principle. And it's very important to understand this because what had happened is Bayard Rustin came into the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and became a mentor to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King around the concept of nonviolence. And from Bayard Rustin's standpoint, and what he got Dr. King initially to agree with is that nonviolence was a principle. Now, you have to understand what principles are. Principles are values that you absolutely never compromise. You absolutely never compromise, right? That's what a principle is. For example, for me, as a revolutionary Pan Africanist, Africa is primary for me. In my vision of the world, Africa is the key to every problem African people have, no matter where we live on the planet Earth. So even though I live in the US could never be primary to me. I would never refer to myself as an African American or an American, any kind of American. I would never refer to myself as that. I'm a kidnapped prisoner from Africa living in America because of chattel slavery. That's my principle. It may not be yours. I don't care if it's yours or not. Just like you don't care about mine, but that's what I believe. So I would never compromise that. And so anytime I hear the word Africa, my antennae go up because I'm ready to defend my mother. That's a principle for me. So nonviolence was a principle to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. But the SNCC workers who were going throughout the South and were not just showing up for big events like Dr. King, because Dr. King did mobilizing work extensively. He wasn't doing organizing work. He wasn't staying in the areas and working with the people every day. He came in for the big events. The March on Washington was a big event. The Edmund Pettus Bridge action was a big event. The confrontation against Bull Connor in Alabama was a big event. These are the events that Dr. King was engaged in. Not speaking against that is very important work, but you have to understand the difference between mobilizing events, which are one-time things, and organizing work, which is day-to-day work to build consistent and ongoing capacity. It's not just event oriented. So the SNCC workers were engaged in organizing work. They were staying with these folks in the South every day. They saw the raw terror that Dr. King and the SCLC people didn't see. They saw the raw terror on a day-to-day basis. People murdered, shot at, beat, their houses set on fire. They saw that every day. I understand, please understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying Dr. King didn't of course he sacrificed. I'd be a damn fool doing a program about him if I didn't believe that. Of course he sacrificed. But you have to understand where the contradictions within the civil rights movement, what they were based on. So the SNCC workers, because they experienced that day-to-day terrorism in the South, they began to see clearly that seeing nonviolence as a principle was unrealistic for the day-to-day life in the South. And those of you that are African, or even if you're not African, if your families come from the South, like mine from Louisiana, everybody has guns. People go hunting. People always have. I've had guns in my family my whole life. There's nobody in my family who would have been talking about what nonviolence is what we need. That they would, if you start talking about that, they would have thought something was wrong with you. I grew up with guns in the house. I've always had guns, and if you're from the South, that's your story too. No matter how you try to front and act like it isn't today, I know that's your history because that's just the history for people that come from that region. And largely, it's because of hunting and fishing and all those things our people did, but it's also because of the violence that the ongoing potential threat of violence that we faced in our day-to-day life. And on the screen, I have a picture of a gentleman who you should know named Amzi Moore. He was a Mississippi sharecropper who worked closely with SNCC organizers. When they would come into Mississippi to do work, he would house them. And this was known to the white power structure. So Amzi Moore was a constant target of the white power structure, but he was respected by the white power structure, by the police, and by the authorities. The police chief in Macomb County, sheriff rather, in Macomb County, said there's only two people I'm afraid of. One is Jesus Christ, and the other is Amzi Moore. That's what the white man said. And the reason why he said that is because Amzi Moore did not have nonviolence as a principle. It was understood by the whites in that region. If you come after my people, I'm coming after yours. And he was respected for that. He was a bodyguard for Medgar Evers whenever he was able to do that. And he performed that role in the South. And there's a story, Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael. He told us the story when I was a young man, and he was staying one time when he was down there doing voter registration work in Mississippi. He stayed at Amzi Moore's house, and at that time, the SNCC workers were in their early 20s, and they were idealistic, and they were all disciples of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at that time, and they were preaching nonviolence as a principle to Amzi Moore. And Amzi Moore was sitting there cleaning his shotgun, looking at him sideways, and he was telling them, yeah, y'all go ahead on with that nonviolent stuff. I'm gonna clean my shotguns and be ready to defend y'all when the nonviolent stuff doesn't work. And so again, I apologize. I'm sitting in the lobby here. People are coming in from the nightlife here in Cape Town, Tanzania, South Africa. So I'll try my best to speak loud enough so that you can hear. But this was a primary contradiction, this question over nonviolence being a principle. And again, we're not saying that nonviolence shouldn't be used at all. Don't leave out of here and lie and say, well, they said that we should always be violent. That's not what we're saying. Is nonviolence is a tactic, meaning you use it when it's effective, and when it's not effective, you go to something else. When I'm dealing with people and they are being disrespectful, I'm going to ask them not to be disrespectful. But if they make a move for me, my loved ones, my community, as Malcolm X said, I'm going to do my best effort to take them off the planet Earth. That is nonviolence as a tactic. I believe in nonviolence as a tactic. I'm a nonviolent person. Until you get violent with me, then I'm going to be violent with you. And any of you that say that that's wrong to be that way, you've been completely brain dirty by our enemies to believe that, because you're setting yourself up for, you're going to lose every time, because we're dealing with the people who have no morality. They have soulless. They do not respond to reason. So, self-defense is the first rule of nature, self-preservation. So that's what the SNCC workers learned. And they began to argue with Dr. King and the others about that. And from that, it began to create this challenge. And Dr. King was such a man of principle, such a man of principle. He could be moved. He could change his mind. He wasn't like a lot of us today, where no matter how much logic is presented to us, we will never change our minds because our egos won't permit us to admit that we're wrong. Dr. King didn't have that problem. He was perfectly able to admit that he was wrong. And as the SNCC workers began to debate him over this question of nonviolence as a principle, he never got to the point where he articulated, okay, I've changed. I don't see nonviolence as a principle anymore. I see it as a tactic. But clearly, based on his actions, we know that was true, because by the mid to late 1960s, Dr. King, as Shakur mentioned, was submitting to the will of the SNCC workers to include the Deacons for Defense, who were former Korean War veterans, former World War II veterans, who were obviously well trained in munitions and how to use weapons, and who formed in Bogalusa, Louisiana, and spread throughout Mississippi and Alabama, and began to come to all of the SNCC actions, the core actions, and the SCLC actions, and begin to provide security for the marchers, for the activists there. And without question, If the deacons had not been active, there were many, many, many people who were killed just for standing up for our rights in the South in the 1960s. There would have been a whole lot more were it not for the deacons' presence there. And Dr. King did not, I repeat, did not come out against the deacons participating. In fact, there was a big blow up during the March Against Fear in June of 1966 in Mississippi. That when James Meredith started the march, he was shot on the second day. In the civil rights organizations, Dr. King being the chair of SCLC, Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael, then being the chair of SNCC, the newly elected chair of SNCC, replacing John Lewis, and Floyd McKissick being the chair of CORE. They met at the Peabody Hotel, Shakura, in Memphis. And they had a press conference and they declared their intention to continue the march and call it the March Against Fear. And SNCC wanted to, and CORE wanted to bring in the deacons. And the NAACP and the Urban League, Roy Wilkins and Whitney Young, respectively, said, if they're here, we're going to pull out and we're going to pull our money out. And Dr. King took the principal position. It said it is the appropriate thing to have the deacons there. He did that. And this was around the time that he applied for a gun permit. Okay, you can check. This is public information. Again, in this program, we articulate facts, well-researched facts. So all you have to do is go down to the Fulton County in Alabama, or I'm sorry, in Georgia, where King was housed, and go through the archives, and you can see that King applied for a gun permit. We're not making that up. We don't have to make that up. We know the history, and that's why we share with you, because we want to inspire you to know it. So this was the history. You should also look up Amzi Moore. Amzi Moore is one of my heroes. I'm gonna tell you this right now. He is one of my heroes, one of the unsung heroes of the civil rights movement. And there were many others. He's just one of them. But we need to understand this, because we think we accept our enemies' definition of our history. The civil rights movement was nonviolent. No, it wasn't. It was nonviolent as a tactic. But you had plenty of people like Amzi Moore, Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, who was there with Amzi Moore in Mississippi when the reporter was interviewing her and asked her, how is your faith, your Christian faith, used to guide you? Because Miss Hamer, if you know the history, she was terrorized by white supremacists. Her house was set on fire. She was beaten so badly, the two men that beat her had to be hospitalized. And she was a strong, resolute woman just because she tried to register to vote. That's all she did. All this had her husband, they fired him from his job. They destroyed their crops because they were sharecroppers. They did everything they could to destroy the Hamer family. And so the reporter came to ask her, and the reporter asked her that question about her faith. And the reporter was expecting her to say what most of you would say, which was that, well, I prayed for Jesus to pray for my enemies and to keep them, to change their minds and give them humanity. But she didn't say that. She said, well, I pray to God every day. You can look it up. The video is on YouTube. I pray to God every day, she said. And I got a shotgun in every room of this shack. And I pray to God if the crackers come in here for straight aim. This was the mentality of our people. Right. This was, and that kind of Christianity that Miss Hamer was talking about, I fully endorse and support that kind of Christianity. I don't support this thing y'all call Christianity, where people can beat the hell out of us and we got to pray for them. You go ahead and do that. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. You better pray that I don't go to prison going after those people. So this is what we got to understand, because this was a contradiction within the civil rights movement. And Dr. King, being a principled person that he was, began to move. Another area where he began to move was SNCC pushed him on the question of the Vietnam War. And this is documented because there were many meetings that many people were involved in where the argument was waged that the civil rights movement should include this question of taking a stand against the Vietnam War. And this is very important for those of you today that are buying this, well, these ICE raids, this is not our problem. I mean, you sound like a fool. You certainly sound like someone who clearly is not involved. Now, I'm not, we can talk about these Africans who have arisen in Philadelphia, who they're calling themselves the Black Panther Party, and they're marching in these anti-ICE raids with guns. I have a lot of concerns about that approach, not because I have any issue with guns. I just think that revolution is masses of people. It's not 10 people. When we come out like that, we make ourselves easy targets for the system to come down upon us. And then now they got the brother saying he's going to attack ICE agents. He didn't say that, but that's what they have. That's how they move against us when you do what they've done. So just saying that, but just making the point that this is all of the things that we have to understand, because all these people on social media criticizing them, and the people criticizing them, I don't agree with their tactics. I think that you have to be much more intentional in how you organize radical activity against the system. You got to, the thing we need to be doing now is waking people up, getting people to understand this history and who we are, not going out with guns and making that the center of it, because we don't even understand why we got the guns or who we need to be fighting against. The masses of our people don't even understand that. So that's the problem. But there are all these people on social media criticizing them. They're not even making an effort. You just on social media. You just in your house, the safety of your house with a computer and an internet account. So you're not qualified to criticize anything. If someone came outside naked with a picket sign, you're not qualified to and yelling crazy slogans. You're not even qualified to criticize that person, because at least they're making an effort. You're not even doing that. You're not even in any organization. You wouldn't go to a surgeon to get surgery if that person that was going to conduct the surgery on you had never studied medicine. You wouldn't let them touch your body unless you were a fool. So why would you listen to people who are not involved in our struggle for liberation talk about what we need to do to get free, what we need to do to be respected? They don't know anything about that. They're not involved in that struggle. They're not doing that work. So let's talk about the pressure test for Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. The experience of the SNCC organizers were represented by the contradictions I just talked about. The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964, where SNCC had the project of integrating African people into the Democratic Party, that did open the Democratic Party and the overall electoral process open for us. It did do that, but it did not put us in the position where you wouldn't have a Barack Obama or Kamala Harris and these other people without SNCC's effort in 1964. But that it did not put us in a position where we had power within these political parties. And that's what SNCC was aiming for. And that's the part most of you today are missing. You have accepted this false belief that these individuals in these positions, like Obama or Harris, is equal to power and upliftment for the masses of our people. And it clearly is not that. So SNCC understood that 60 years ago, even if a lot of us are confused about that today. So the next year in 1965, they went a different direction. They started the Lowndes County Freedom Organization in Alabama, which was an African political party. And because people couldn't read in Lowndes County, they called it by its symbol, the Black Panther. It was the first Black Panther Party. That's where the Black Panther Party came from. Huey P. Newton got the idea from the SNCC project, the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. And that's documented. All you got to do is read his autobiography, Revolutionary Suicide. He talks about, he wrote Kwame Ture and asked him, and Kwame told us that, and it's in Kwame's autobiography, Ready for the Revolution. We deal with historical, factual sources on this program. We don't just talk out the side of our mouth. So do the research. That's what it was. And so we talked about the March Against Fear. SNCC unleashed the Black Power slogan during that march, and Dr. King again demonstrated his principled position by refusing to denounce the Black Power slogan, refusing to denounce it, understanding that we had every right to assert the necessity for us to have our own vision for how we function in society. We didn't have to be parrots of the dominant white society, which was the expectation for us before the Black Power slogan, and is still the expectation of us to this day. And then King further demonstrated his integrity by being pushed farther again. against the Vietnam War. His speech on April 4th, 1967, a year to the date of his assassination, cemented his divorce from the modern civil rights movement and also his isolation by the capitalist system. And this, of course, led to his assassination. It did. It led to his assassination. But what's important to understand is that even though King practiced nonviolence, that didn't make him a coward. Anybody can pick up a weapon and still be a coward. I would argue that someone that picks up a weapon and shoots somebody that doesn't have a weapon is a coward. Somebody that doesn't have a weapon but stands up uncompromisingly against injustice is no coward. Dr. King was no coward. Dr. King was no sellout. Dr. King was no light heart. Dr. King was no weak-minded person. He had strong integrity. And if you want you leave with any lesson about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, even though I don't agree with 5% of what he was talking about, I respect the hell out of him because he was a person who was not afraid to stand up for what is right, regardless of the consequences. And so with that, we really thank you for joining us today. It is it's right now about 5 minutes to 3 a.m. in the morning where I am. So I want to just thank you again for being here with us. The QR code, join us next week, rather. Again, Shakur is going to do her report back on her trip to Cuba last month. So join us for that. It'll be outstanding. You definitely do not want to miss that. You just think about what you know about Cuba. And no offense against you, but I guarantee you 95% of what you know is absolutely false. So if you want to correct that, as you should, because they want you to be against socialism, because if these people out here can't pay their bills, don't have health care, socialism is the solution to that. And they don't want you to know that. So they want you to, well, I'm against socialism, even though you don't know what it is. The countries that are socialist like Cuba, you don't know anything about it. Or Venezuela, you can't articulate anything about it. And you should stop and think about that. You should want to do something about it. So show up next week so you can learn some things. Very important. The QR code in the upper left-hand corner, the red and white one, has all the APRP programs in it. Our self-defense class, our weekly community self-defense in Sacramento. Obviously, I will not be back this week, so there's no class this week. Next class we have will be on January 29th. So put that on your calendar. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You can do that by going to aaprp-intl.org. We invite you to do that and support our work in the Sahel region. Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, our organizers on the ground are bringing revolutionary literature into that region. It's a very expensive process. So they have, if you scan the QR code on the bottom right, become a monthly sponsor for their work. You support as much as you can. 5, 10, 20, 50, $100 a month comes right out of your bank account and allows them to buy literature. If you know anything about Africa, the only people that have the money to bring large volumes of literature over here are the faith organizations that are reactionary, that are not doing anything to give our people self-determination. So all the books you see here are Huck Finn and C. Jack Run or John Run or whatever the hell it is. So we're trying to bring literature that talks about the things this program talks about. So support this program so you can do that. And in the upper right-hand corner, we want to please ask you to buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It is only $8. There's never been a time where the book was more relevant than now. So if you bought it and you haven't read it, you should read it, and you shouldn't even just read it by yourself. Get in a group and read it, and get people to buy the book. Call the local library where you are, have them order copies of the book. Call your bookstores and have them do it. Please help us spread the word. The QR code is right there, so you can get the information. You can give it to your bookstore and your library. Please help us do that. That's all we ask you to do. We don't ask you to do anything else. So it's very important. 100% of the proceeds of the book go towards the anti-fascist work I'm involved in. They help with the self-defense classes I'm teaching. Everyone's welcome to that. You can come, you get good training. You exercise your mind and your body. All the work that we do in the community, which is a lot around anti-fascism. So when you buy the book, the proceeds go to that. So we thank you for that. We thank you for coming today. We invite you to hopefully be inspired by what we're doing. I'm inspired. I'm fired up. I'm not discouraged. I'm not demoralized. I'm more fired up than I ever been in my life. And I want to invite you to be at the same place. Forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your day.